They say you can tell everything about a person's character, not by how they treat you when they need your help, but by how they treat you the moment they think you have nothing left to offer them. I have found this to be devastatingly true. And the people who mistake silence for weakness, who look across a dinner table at a quiet old man in a faded flannel shirt and see a fool they can sweep aside, those are always the ones who end up staring at the wreckage of their own arrogance. My name is Marcus Vance. I am 68 years old, a retired combat engineer with the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and for 22 years, I lived in a 4-bedroom farmhouse on the quiet outskirts of Licking County, Ohio. I build things. I measure foundations. I calculate load-bearing limits, and I know that no matter how impressive a structure looks on the outside, if the ground beneath it isn't solid, the whole thing will eventually come crashing down. On Thanksgiving night, my stepson Brandon stood at the head of my dining room table, picked up my old military dog tags from the side table, and tossed them into a plastic trash bag like a piece of worthless junk. It's time to face reality. "Marcus," Brandon said, sliding a typed piece of paper across the mahogany table I had hand-carved myself. "Mom is gone. This house belongs to Evelyn and me now. You've got 30 days to pack your old army gear and clear out." I didn't shout. I didn't reach across the table. I just sat very still, the kind of still you learn when you're clearing landmines in the rain, and looked at my late wife's children. They thought they were taking my home. They had no idea they were walking straight onto a field I had mapped out 2 decades before they even learned how to pay their own bills. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get settled, because this story is going to show you what happens when greed tries to dig up a foundation it didn't lay. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below, letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to love this one. Let me back up so you understand how we got to that table. 22 years ago, I married Eleanor. She was a gentle, soft-spoken woman who came into my life with 2 young children, Brandon and Evelyn, and a heart weighed down by the financial mess left behind by her first husband. I loved Eleanor with everything I had. When we got together, I didn't see her kids as stepchildren. I saw them as my family. I paid for Brandon's college tuition when his grades were too low for scholarships. I covered Evelyn's credit card debts when her lifestyle vlogs didn't generate the income she claimed they did. Whenever the roof leaked, I fixed it. Whenever the property taxes were due, my bank account paid them. I spent 22 years being the quiet pillar in the background, making sure the floorboards beneath their feet never creaked. My late wife Eleanor passed away 7 months ago after a long, grueling battle with cancer. During those final months, I was the one who sat beside her hospital bed, held her hand, paid the medical co-pays, and made sure she felt safe. Brandon and Evelyn showed up for quick photo opportunities, made dramatic posts on social media about their strength, and then vanished back to their apartments in Columbus. I didn't complain. I knew grief hit people differently. But 3 weeks after we laid Eleanor to rest, the dynamic in my house shifted. It started with small things. Evelyn would walk into the kitchen, look at my old work boots by the door, and make a loud show of stepping over them. "It smells like a workshop in here," she'd remark to her friends' speakers. "I can't wait until we renovate this place into a modern farmhouse aesthetic." Brandon started bringing commercial real estate agents onto the porch without telling me. I'd be in the garage, shaping a piece of oak, and I'd hear him outside pointing at the yard. We're thinking of listing the full 5 acres as a residential package. The old man is just staying in the back until we finalize the estate." I said nothing. In my line of work, when you see a structure beginning to lean, you don't start yelling at the timber. You check the blueprints. You measure the structural tension. The dam finally broke on Thanksgiving dinner. It was the first holiday without Eleanor. I spent 5 hours roasting a turkey, baking potatoes, and setting the table with Eleanor's favorite china. I wanted us to remember her together. I wanted us to feel like a family, even if the main link in our china was gone. Brandon arrived 40 minutes late, dressed in a tailored blazer he couldn't afford, accompanied by Evelyn, who was live streaming her arrival on her phone. They sat down, barely touched the food, and spent 20 minutes complaining about the traffic on Highway 16. Then, Brandon set his glass down, cleared his throat, and looked at Evelyn. She gave him a small, approving nod. "Marcus," Brandon began, adopting the slick, rehearsed tone of a junior salesman trying to close a difficult deal. "We need to handle the business side of Mom's passing. It's been 7 months, and we can't let emotional attachments stall our financial planning." I set my fork down slowly. "Financial planning?" "The house," Evelyn chimed in, leaning forward with her manicured nails resting on the tablecloth. Mom left a handwritten addendum in her personal desk. She explicitly stated that her estate, including this house, passes directly to Brandon and me. You've had time to grieve, Marcus, but Brandon has a major investment opportunity in Columbus, and we need the capital from selling this property." Brandon reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a folded document along with a formal eviction notice template he had printed off the internet. He slid it across the table, right next to Eleanor's china. "We're giving you 30 days, Brandon said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "You can move your woodworking tools into the small detached shed at the far edge of the property until you find an apartment in town. But we're listing the main house next week." I looked at the piece of paper. Then I looked up at Brandon. "Your mother stood in this room when we rebuilt this porch. I paid off her debts. I paid off the mortgage structure on this house. I spent 22 years ensuring you two had a roof over your heads." Evelyn laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Oh, please, Marcus. You were a sergeant in the Army Corps of Engineers. You made a modest pension and fixed things with your hands. Mom brought the class to this family. You just lived here. Don't act like you built an empire." To emphasize her point, Brandon reached over to the small side table where I kept my wooden memory box. Inside were my discharge papers, my late wife's wedding band, and my military dog tags from my service overseas. Brandon picked up the brass dog tags, jingled them in his hand with a condescending smirk, and dropped them into the black plastic trash bag he had brought for Eleanor's old tablecloths. "Keep your old army junk in the shed, Marcus," Brandon said coldly. "This house is moving into the 21st century. We need you out by the end of December." The room went completely silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the wind brushing against the oak trees outside, trees I had planted with my own hands 20 years ago. I didn't pick up the trash bag. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell Brandon that his tailored blazer still had the store tag tucked under the collar because he intended to return it after taking photos. I simply reached out, picked up my dog tags from the bag, wiped them carefully with the sleeve of my flannel shirt, and placed them into my front pocket. 30 days, I said quietly. Glad we're on the same page, Brandon sneered, standing up and buttoning his jacket. We're meeting a regional homebuyer here on Tuesday. Make sure the driveway is clear of your old pickup truck. They left 20 minutes later, leaving the dirty plates on the table and the front door unlocked. I sat at that table in the quiet house for a long time. I finished my coffee. I picked up Eleanor's framed photograph from the mantel, ran my thumb over the silver frame, and whispered, "I tried. Eleanor, I truly tried." Then I walked out to my old Chevy truck, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out a faded leather binder that hadn't been opened since 2002. Inside was a certified, stamped document from the Licking County Recorder's Office. Brandon and Evelyn knew about their mother's handwritten note. They knew about the house registration papers from the local township. But there was one fundamental fact about this property that neither of them had ever bothered to look up in 22 years. They thought they owned the house. They had no idea who owned the ground it was sitting on. The next morning, I was up at 5:30, before the first pale yellow streaks of November daylight even managed to break through the frost on the bedroom window. I didn't pack like a man fleeing a house. I packed like a soldier breaking down an observation post. I took my clothes, my hand tools, my leather-bound notebooks, and the framed photo of Eleanor from our trip to the Smoky Mountains back in 2008. I carried everything down to the small wood shop I had built 15 years ago at the far eastern boundary of the property. It was a sturdy, 40 by 60 foot pole barn with insulated walls, a wood-burning stove, and a concrete slab foundation that I had poured myself with 2 bags of rebar and 4 yards of ready mix. By 8 o'clock, Brandon's silver BMW pulled up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust against the dry hedges. Evelyn was right behind him in her leased convertible. They didn't even check to see if I was still inside the main house. Through the shop window, I watched Brandon unlock the front door, gesturing broadly to a man in a navy blazer holding a digital measuring wheel. They were already measuring the living room. They were already counting their money. I set my thermos of dark roast coffee on the workbench, picked up my cell phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in almost 3 years. County Land Survey Office, a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "This is Hank." "Hank," I said quietly. "It's Marcus Vance." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the distinct sound of a heavy mug being set down on a metal desk. Hank Miller and I had served in the 20th Engineer Brigade together 40 years ago. We'd cleared access roads through swamps and mapped supply corridors under conditions that made Licking County winters look like a walk in a municipal park. When he retired from active service, he took his engineering degree and became the chief deputy surveyor for the county. "Marcus," Hank said, his tone shifting instantly from official routine to sharp attention. "I heard about Eleanor. I'm sorry I couldn't make the service last month. My hip was giving me fits. How are you holding up?" "Brother." "I'm holding," I said, looking out the shop window as Brandon walked a real estate appraiser around my garden beds. "Hank, I need a certified copy of the original boundary plat and easement registry from June of 2002. Parcel 14B, the old Miller Farm Division." Hank didn't ask why. He was an engineer. He understood that when a man asks for a deed registry on a Saturday morning, the bridge is already taking weight. "Give me 20 minutes, Hank said. "I'll pull the microfiche and the GIS records." "You coming down to the courthouse?" "I'll be there in 30. I pulled my Chevy pickup onto Route 16, leaving Brandon and his appraiser pointing at my custom cedar siding. When I arrived at the Licking County Administration Building in Newark, Hank was waiting for me in a back conference room surrounded by rolled-up topographic maps and heavy leather-bound land ledgers. He laid out a large printout across the wooden table, a high-resolution aerial overlay marked with bright yellow and red survey lines. "All right, Marcus," Hank said, tapping a pencil against the paper. "Let's review the ledger, so we're looking at the exact same numbers. In May of 2002, 6 months before you and Eleanor got married, you purchased Parcel 14B, 5.2 acres of unincorporated land, outright from the Miller estate. Cash sale, recorded under your name alone." "Correct," I said. 3 months later, Hank continued, sliding a secondary document across the table, Eleanor wanted to construct the primary dwelling structure using the payout from her previous settlement. To keep her tax obligations separate from yours, your attorney drafted a structured tenancy agreement. The house structure, the wood, the drywall, the roof was registered under Eleanor's name as a personal improvement. But the land title, the access easement from the county road, the wellhead rights, and the drain field allocation remain strictly in your name, held under a perpetual single-owner land trust. Hank looked up over his reading glasses, a thin smile touching his weathered face. "In simple terms, Marcus, Eleanor owned the lumber sitting on top of the grass. You own every square inch of dirt beneath it, including the 12 feet of gravel driveway required to step foot onto the porch. Without your written consent or an active land lease agreement, that house is a landlocked structure with zero legal access rights." "And Eleanor's handwritten note?" I asked, setting Brandon's eviction paper on the table. "The one her kids are waving around?" Hank picked up the paper, read it once, and let out a dry, rasping laugh. "A handwritten addendum can bequeath physical personal property like furniture, clothes, or even a structure she had a titled interest in. But Eleanor couldn't give them the land because she never owned a single grain of dirt on that parcel. If they try to sell that house, any legitimate title company will flag this within 5 seconds of pulling the deed abstract. It's an unmarketable asset." I looked down at the map. The red line of my property boundary completely enclosed the house, the driveway, the septic field, and the utility hookups. Brandon and Evelyn thought they had inherited a $250,000 real estate asset. In reality, they had inherited a timber box sitting in the middle of my yard. "What do you want to do, Marcus?" Hank asked, leaning back. "I can file an official boundary lock with the county recorder right now. It will freeze any property transfer attempts automatically." I stared at the blueprint for a long moment. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about how hard she had tried to shield her children's selfishness from me over the years. I had honored her memory by being patient. But patience that allows disrespect to flourish isn't kindness, it's enablement. "Don't file the freeze just yet, Hank," I said, folding the survey map carefully and tucking it into my flannel jacket. "Brandon invited a regional corporate buyer to inspect the property on Tuesday morning. He wants to sign an intent to purchase contract right on my dining room table." Hank's eyes narrowed. Then a slow, knowing grin spread across his face. "You want them to commit to the paper first." "I want them to build their entire tower," I replied quietly, "right before they find out what the foundation is made of." I drove back to the property that afternoon. The real estate appraiser had left, but Brandon's BMW was still parked by the front steps. As I walked toward my shop, Brandon stepped off the porch, holding a clipboard and looking at me with an expression of smug satisfaction. Out taking a walk. Marcus? He called out, his voice echoing across the quiet yard. Just a heads up, the appraiser agrees with my valuation. We're listing the place at $450,000. The buyer coming on Tuesday is ready to make a cash offer. I stopped near the edge of the gravel drive, keeping my hands in my jacket pockets. $450,000, I repeated, my voice unhurried. That's a big number, Brandon. It's what the market demands, Brandon said, taking a step toward me, his chest puffed out under his vest. Evelyn and I are going to split the proceeds 60-40. We might leave you a couple thousand out of goodwill so you can pay first and last month's rent on a small studio in town. See? We're not heartless. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a 32-year-old man who had never cleared a ditch, never repaired a fence, and never taken responsibility for a single mistake in his life. Make sure your buyer reads the full property abstract before he signs anything on Tuesday. Brandon, I said softly. Brandon chuckled, shaking his head as he turned back toward his car. Don't worry about the legal details, old man. We've got a professional handling it. I know you do, I whispered to myself as his sports car pulled away. I know you do. By Monday morning, the cold north wind had settled heavy over Licking County, turning the red oak leaves into dry, chattering paper across the driveway. I didn't spend my weekend pacing or arguing. I spent it in my shop, taking inventory of everything I had built, provided, and maintained for 22 years without ever asking for a receipt. I pulled out my old leather ledger, the one with the brass corners where I recorded every property tax payment, every utility bill, every structural improvement, and every emergency loan I'd quietly absorbed since marrying Eleanor. Over 2 decades, I had personally paid off $74,000 remaining on Eleanor's premarital house mortgage. I had paid $16,000 for a new roof after a hailstorm in 2016 when her insurance fell short. And for 22 straight years, the electric, heating oil, and municipal water accounts for the main house had been drawn directly from my personal checking account at Licking County National Bank. They wanted me out of their house. They wanted a clean split. A clean split works both ways. At 8 o'clock sharp on Monday, I parked my Chevy truck outside the offices of Vance and Miller Surveying on Main Street. Hank was already at his desk, 2 steaming mugs of black coffee waiting beside a freshly printed, heavy stock legal binder stamped with the official seal of the county engineer. Everything is drafted, Marcus, Hank said, sliding the top document toward me. Notice of access revocation and revocation of permissive land use. Since the driveway, the wellhead access, the septic drain field, and the electrical pole anchor are situated entirely on your deeded land parcel, you are legally exercising your right to terminate all uncompensated, non-contractual usage. I picked up my pen, signed my name at the bottom in bold, clear black ink, and handed it back to Hank. And the utility accounts? Hank asked, eyeing me over his spectacles. I called the power company and the oil delivery service an hour ago, I replied evenly. Effective midnight tonight, all utility accounts registered under my name and social security number at Parcel 14B are officially disconnected. If Brandon wants electricity and heat for his big sales walkthrough tomorrow, he's welcome to set up his own commercial service account. Hank chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He'll need a signed land use easement from the property owner just to hook up a new meter, which means he'll be applying to you. He doesn't know that yet, I said. By 2 o'clock Monday afternoon, A process server formally delivered the registered legal packet directly to Brandon's real estate office in downtown Columbus. A second copy was sent via certified courier to Evelyn's apartment. I didn't have to wait long for the blast. At 4:15, the gravel outside my shop exploded as Brandon's BMW came tearing up the drive, sliding to a stop just inches from my woodpile. The door slammed so hard I thought the glass would shatter. Evelyn jumped out of the passenger side, her phone already held up in front of her face, recording. Brandon stormed into the shop, his face flushed red, his tailored coat flying open. He slammed the white legal envelope onto my workbench, right next to a pile of cedar shavings. "What the hell is this?" "Marcus?" Brandon roared, his voice cracking with rage. "My broker got a notice from the county recorder. A boundary restriction? A land access hold? Are you out of your mind?" I didn't drop the hand plane I was using. I kept my rhythm, shaving a paper, then strip off a piece of dark walnut before setting the tool down carefully on a soft cloth. "Read the document." "Brandon," I said softly. "It's written in plain English. It says we can't bring buyers onto the property," Evelyn screamed from the doorway, pointing her camera directly at my face. "It says you're revoking driveway access. We have a cash buyer coming here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning with a $250,000 deposit check. You're trying to ruin us. You told me on Thanksgiving that this house belongs entirely to you and Evelyn," I said, stepping around the workbench and looking straight into Brandon's shaking eyes. "You said you had a handwritten note from your mother giving you the structure. You told me I had 30 days to pack my old army junk and get out." "It is our house," Brandon yelled, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Mom left it to us. She left you the structure." "Brandon," I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady and heavy as granite. "She didn't leave you the dirt beneath it. Eleanor never owned this land. I bought this parcel before I ever met your mother. I paid off her debts. I built the foundation. I laid the gravel you parked your luxury car on 10 seconds ago." I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out the certified county parcel survey, and unfolded it on the bench between us. "This red line," I pointed with a callus-thickened index finger, "is my property line. The house sitting inside it is yours. But every square inch of ground surrounding it, including the front steps, the well, the septic lines, and the 12 feet of gravel leading to the county road is mine. As of midnight tonight, you are officially trespassing if you step off the porch." Brandon stared at the map. His eyes darted from the red boundary lines to the county surveyor's seal, then to my face. The arrogance that he had worn like a badge for 3 weeks began to crack, replaced by a cold, creeping realization. You can't do this," Brandon stammered, his loud voice suddenly losing its weight. "We're family. You raised us." "I raised 2 children who threw my military dog tags into a trash bag on Thanksgiving night," I said, without a trace of anger, only absolute clarity. "You wanted a business arrangement. Brandon, you told me not to let emotional attachments stall your financial planning. So I'm following your advice." Evelyn lowered her phone slightly, her mouth open. "Marcus, the power company sent a text. They said the electricity is being shut off tonight." "Of course it is," I replied. "I pay for the electricity on this parcel. Since I don't live in that house anymore, I have no reason to power it. If you want heat for your buyer tomorrow, I suggest you bring candles." "You old bastard," Brandon stepped forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "We'll sue you. We'll take you to court. My lawyer will destroy this paper by morning." "Call him," I said quietly, picking up my hand plane again. "His name is probably listed in the same court directory as Hank Miller's. Ask him what happens when a structure is built on a single-owner land trust without an easement." I turned my back on them and went back to work, the rhythmic scraping of iron against walnut filling the silent shop. Brandon stood there for 10 long seconds, his chest heaving, his face pale as chalk, before turning toward his car. They drove away fast, but the confident roar of the BMW engine sounded hollow this time. I worked until 6 o'clock, then walked over to the main house just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I stood at the edge of the lawn and watched the porch light flicker once, twice, and then go completely dark as the electric company executed the shutoff order. The big 4-bedroom house sat there in the cold November twilight, black, silent, and freezing. Tuesday morning arrived with a thin skin of frost over the grass. By 9:45, 2 cars pulled up the driveway. The first was Brandon's BMW, followed closely by a black Lincoln Navigator belonging to Arthur Vance, a prominent corporate attorney representing Midwest Property Group, along with the lead commercial investor, a man named Mr. Henderson. Brandon and Evelyn rushed out of their cars, looking disheveled and exhausted. They had spent the entire night calling real estate attorneys in Columbus, only to be told the exact same thing Hank Miller had laid out. A house without an easement on private land is an unmarketable liability. Hank Miller and I were already sitting on my shop porch, drinking coffee from heavy ceramic mugs, watching the scene unfold. Mr. Henderson stepped out of his SUV, holding a leather folder and wearing a thick woolen overcoat. He looked around at the cold, dark house, then at Brandon, who was sweating despite the 28-degree temperature. "Brandon, Mr. Henderson said, his voice crisp and professional. "Why are the porch lights off? And why did my attorney just receive a boundary notification from the Licking County Recorder's Office 45 minutes ago?" It's just a minor administrative misunderstanding," Brandon stammered, his hands shaking as he motioned toward the house door. "My stepfather is just playing games because he's bitter about moving out. The house structure is completely ours. We have the handwritten addendum right here." Mr. Vance, the corporate attorney, didn't look at the handwritten paper Brandon was waving. Instead, he looked past Brandon, directly at Hank Miller, who was stepping off my shop porch carrying a certified blue line survey chart. "Hank Miller?" Attorney Vance asked, stepping forward with an eyebrow raised. "You're handling the land survey on parcel 14B?" "I am," Arthur, Hank said, shaking the attorney's hand firmly. "And as Chief Deputy Surveyor, I'm formally advising your client that parcel 14B is held under an irrevocable single-owner land trust belonging exclusively to Mr. Marcus Vance, sitting right there." Hank unrolled the large survey map on the hood of the Lincoln Navigator. "The structure your client is inspecting," Hank explained, pointing to the aerial overlay, "was built as a personal improvement by the late Mrs. Eleanor Vance. However, the land beneath it, the 12-foot access drive, the wellhead, and the utility tie-ins belong entirely to Marcus Vance. There is no active land lease, no utility easement, and no right-of-way recorded on this title." Mr. Henderson looked at the map, then turned his gaze slowly to Brandon. Are you telling me you brought my acquisition firm out here to sign a purchase contract on a house that has zero legal right to touch the driveway? We can negotiate a lease with him, Evelyn chimed in desperately, stepping up to Mr. Henderson. Marcus is reasonable. He'll sign an easement. He raised us. I walked over slowly, my work boots crunching softly on the frozen gravel. I stood beside Hank, looking at Mr. Henderson and his attorney. I won't be signing an easement. Gentlemen, I said, my voice quiet, steady, and clear in the crisp morning air. And I won't be entering into a land lease agreement with Brandon or Evelyn. Marcus, please. Brandon dropped all pretense of business professionalism, his voice breaking into a panicked pitch. You can't do this to us. The investor is offering $450,000. We need this money. I have debts in Columbus. You had a home? Brandon, I said, looking him dead in the eye. You had a family that supported you for 22 years. But on Thanksgiving night, you stood in my dining room, told me I was nothing more than an old louse living on your mother's coattails, and threw my army dog tags into a trash bag. Mr. Henderson looked at Brandon, his expression hardening instantly from professional interest to utter disgust. You threw his military tags in the trash, Mr. Henderson asked, his voice dropping into a dangerous quiet. It was a misunderstanding, Brandon pleaded, turning pale. We were just clearing the room. Mr. Henderson snapped his leather folder shut with a loud, sharp crack that echoed across the yard. We're done here, Mr. Henderson said flatly. Mr. Vance, we are withdrawing our offer immediately. I do not do business with people who attempt to hide structural title defects, and I certainly do not do business with fools who disrespect combat veterans. Mr. Henderson. Wait, Evelyn cried out, reaching for his arm, but Attorney Vance stepped between them, holding up a hand. Do not contact our office again, Miss Vance, the attorney warned sternly. If you attempt to list this property on any public MLS without disclosing the landlocked restriction, we will file a formal fraud complaint with the State Real Estate Licensing Board against your brother. We watched in absolute silence as the black Lincoln Navigator backed down the driveway, turned onto the county road, and vanished down Route 16. Brandon stood in the middle of the gravel drive, his tailored blazer shivering in the wind, his face completely devoid of color. Evelyn sank onto the cold porch steps of the dark, unheated house, burying her face in her manicured hands, sobbing quietly. What are we supposed to do now? Brandon whispered, looking at me with eyes full of terror and defeat. The property taxes are due next month. The maintenance is due. We can't afford to keep a house we can't sell or live in. I reached into my flannel shirt, pulled out my brass dog tags, and held them in the palm of my hand. The brass caught the cold morning sunlight. Under county code, I said calmly, an unmaintained, landlocked structure sitting on private land for more than 90 days without a lease agreement is subject to a formal removal order. You can either pay $50,000 to have the house dismantled and hauled away in pieces, or you can sign a deed of surrender transferring the timber rights to my land trust for $1 single. Brandon stared at me, his jaw working silently. He tried to find words, a loophole, a threat, or an excuse, but there was nothing left. The foundation he had built on greed and arrogance had collapsed completely under its own weight. 2 days later, in the presence of Hank Miller and a county notary, Brandon and Evelyn signed the deed of surrender. They packed their personal clothes in plastic bins and left Licking County in silence. Without a single photo for social media, without a single dime from the $450,000 dream they had tried to steal. I walked back into the main house on Friday evening. I turned the main breaker back on, lit the wood stove in the living room, and sat in Eleanor's favorite armchair. I picked up my wooden memory box from the side table, set my military dog tags inside next to Eleanor's wedding ring, and closed the lid with a soft, satisfying click. I didn't keep the house out of spite or greed. 6 months later, I signed a perpetual deed transfer turning the entire 5-acre parcel and the restored farmhouse over to the Ohio Veterans Outreach Housing Trust, a nonprofit organization that provides permanent, rent-free homes for injured veterans returning from service overseas. Every time I walk down to my shop in the morning and see the new flag flying proudly over the front porch, I am reminded of one simple, unshakable truth that every engineer learns early in life. You can build the grandest structure in the world, but if you build it on someone else's foundation while disrespecting the hands that laid the stone, it is only a matter of time before the earth takes back what belongs to it. Looking back at everything that happened with Brandon and Evelyn, I often wonder if they ever realized that respect isn't something you demand when you think you're in power. It's something you earn through how you treat people when you think nobody is watching. If you were in my position, sitting at that table on Thanksgiving night, would you have walked away quietly and let the legal foundation do the talking? Or would you have confronted them right then and there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.